This is section 174. We're going to take a look at transformation of functions, and we're going to focus on reflecting over the x and y axis. So let's first take a look at the reflection over the x-axis. If you ever get a negative in front of your function in this form here, that means that your function is going to reflect over the x-axis. So in this example, f of x equals x squared, if I had a negative in front of it, so instead I have negative x squared, what that negative implies is that your graph or your parent graph is going to reflect over the x-axis, and from there, if you have any other transformations, you would then apply that transformation. So now let's look at what a graph when we wanted to reflect over the y-axis. The way that we identify that is there's a negative in front of your input. And so in this instance, if you have a negative in front of the x, that means that it's going to reflect over the y-axis. And so in this instance, because it's positive and then this one it's negative, that means my graph reflected over the x-axis. I'm sorry, the y-axis. So now let's look at an example here. Now there's kind of like a method to this, and kind of keeping focused on that method is going to be very helpful as we do this. So the first thing is we need to just identify elements of this. So I see a negative, right? And that negative means reflection over the x-axis. I have a square root, so my parent graph is going to look like that. Then I also have a horizontal shift of 4, and I'm going to have a vertical shift of 1. So usually what helps us is first we want to kind of just draw in that parent graph. And I just do this very lightly. I'm just drawing in that parent graph. Then we apply the reflection. So this is going to reflect over the x-axis. And the reason why I draw it is because it's so much easier to visualize that reflection when you draw it. And then from there, now we can apply the horizontal and vertical shift, and we're going to draw the same shape as that reflection. So move over 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and move up 1. And so from here, that's going to be my graph. So we identified the parent graph, I applied the reflection if there's any, and then I did the rigid transformations. It's always important to apply the reflection before you move the function. Let's take a look at another one. So negative 2 to the x plus 2 minus 2. So this is exponential. It starts at 0, 1, has that shape, and it has that horizontal asymptote at 0. There's a reflection over the x. There's a horizontal shift of negative 2, and there's a vertical shift of negative 2. So drawing it in, drawing my parent graph. All right, so there's my parent graph. And now we can go ahead and draw in my reflection. So now this dot gets reflected down. And the way to kind of think if you did it right is if it's symmetric, right? Like if it's visually symmetric, that means you did the reflection right. Now from there, now I can move it over minus 2 and down 2. Now your horizontal asymptote, which was here, is also going to move down 2 spaces. And so now I can draw in the shape of my graph. So I did the reflection before I did the other transformations. Let's look at one more. So I have negative x plus 2 squared minus 2. So my parent graph, that's quadratic. There's a reflection over the x. There's a horizontal shift of negative 2, and then there's a vertical shift of negative 2. So drawing in my parent graph. Now the reflection. So now it's going to get reflected down. Now I can apply the transformation. So it's going to move over 2 spaces and down 2 spaces. So from there, I can draw in my graph. So concluding today's lesson, what did we learn today? We learned how to transform a function, but we focused on reflecting over the x and the y-axis. Now, what type of transformation should be applied first? We should always apply the reflections before any other type of transformation. And then what's the difference between negative f of x and f of negative x? Negative f of x, this means a reflection over the x. And then f of negative x means reflection over the y. This does conclude our lesson. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments.